Thank you so much, everyone who's participated today. It's been so great to work with you, to just really to serve God together with you. It's such a pleasure, and again, just thank you for your willingness to serve. Hopefully you're still in the book of Proverbs. Really what I like to do on Youth Sunday is to welcome you as a congregation in on our study and kind of take a look at what the youth are studying this year in Koinonia. So every Wednesday night, we've been studying through the book of Proverbs, and I know we're not going to finish it, but that's okay. But we're in Proverbs 11 right now, and one theme that has just been reverberating all year for us is to grow in wisdom. So really, we're picking up where we essentially left off. We're a few verses ahead, but Proverbs 11 is interesting to me anyway, because it really kind of gets to the heart of the issue and really causes us to understand why there is such a difference, why there is such a chasm between wisdom and folly. There's nothing in common. There are no mutual interests. There is just a great dividing wall between the two. And through the study this year, we've seen how really the decisions that we make, everything plays into this. However, the temptation would be to look at just the symptoms and say that the symptoms are what's wrong with a person. The symptoms are revealing to us of what's really wrong with a person. And really, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with all of us? And it all starts in the heart. So beginning, like I said, in Proverbs chapter 11, I just want to set a little bit of context with the book of Proverbs and really understanding wisdom, and then we'll jump into this passage's particulars. So Proverbs 11, verses 12 through 21, falls in the middle section of the book of Proverbs. So up to this point, we've actually been able to follow a narrative where wisdom, personified as a woman crying out in the streets, has been begging, calling out, repeatedly asking for anybody to stop and listen what she has to say. And people just keep walking by and walking by and walking by. Nobody wants to take the time to sit and listen to what she has to say. And it's as if there's destruction right around the corner, and everybody's just mindlessly walking straight into that trap. And she knows what's around the corner, and she's begging for somebody to stop and listen to what she has to say, and everyone just keeps on walking. So that's really the beginning section of the book in defining what wisdom is. So I want to go and look at that first. But when we get to the middle section, there are many sort of practical examples of how this could play out. And when you read 11 and onwards, it seems very scattered and random, but that's only if you're viewing those disconnected from the opening chapters. So that's what I want to do, is go back to the opening chapters and see how this plays out, so that we understand what this has to do with the whole of the book of Proverbs. So all of these sayings, all of these wise sayings, all of these proverbs, every single one is built on the Hebrew word, the foundation for this, for wisdom, the Hebrew word for wisdom, chokmah, which is described all throughout wisdom literature. The book of Job, the book of Proverbs, you can see this word used and really defined and utilized constantly throughout the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. And there are a few things that we need to understand about chokmah before we can really progress into this passage. Number one, wisdom only comes from God. So a couple of verses really quick, if you would. Flip over to Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. Wisdom comes from God, and more specifically, it starts with the fear of the Lord. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. It's on page 527 in your Pew Bible. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and fools despise wisdom and instruction. And right there, from the very first chapter, that's really where the divide takes place. As for the wise, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. However, fools despise wisdom, and the reason for that is because they do not fear God, and they do not have the profound respect and humility approaching Him and His spoken word. Therefore, it's folly to them. They despise it. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 19, just a few pages after, says that the Lord, by wisdom, founded the earth. By understanding, He established the heavens. In Job chapter 28, If you just flip back a few pages here, again, this is Job and Proverbs, a part of this wisdom literature section. Just a few pages before, Job asks, where is wisdom? In chapter 28. So if we look at verse 12, where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the land of the living. The deep says, it is not in me, and the sea says, it is not with me. It cannot be bought for gold, and silver cannot be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. The price of wisdom is above pearls. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. So that begs the question, verse 20, from where, then, does wisdom come from? Well, the answer is it comes before all of those precious things that were just listed, because wisdom was there when God created all of those things. So we understand that it comes from God. We understand that it predates even my own being, my own physical being. It precedes the foundation of the earth. Chapter 28, verse 12 specifically says that only God knows it. Only God gives it. Again, I'm sorry for the jumping around, but go to Proverbs chapter 2, verse 6. Page 528. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 6. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity. And then one more passage on that. Job chapter 11. Just back and forth between wisdom books. Job chapter 11, verse 6. I'm just, for context, going to back up to verse 5. Job 11, verse 5. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you, and that he would tell you the secrets of wisdom. For he is manifold in understanding. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. Wisdom, it comes from God alone. It cannot be bought. It cannot be sought after. We cannot purchase it. It's from God alone. It is imparted to us. No human being who searches for it is going to find it. We could search far and wide, and we could go back to Job 28 and read, and I would encourage you to do so later. The rest of chapter 28 is him detailing this search, almost like they're going on an adventure to go and find wisdom, and they search far and wide. Their search is exhaustive, and they can't find it anywhere. Its worth cannot be estimated. And yet, even though it's of exceeding worth, it's given freely to all who ask. Really think about that. What worthwhile and precious thing is given freely to anybody who asks for it? Isn't that usually held under lock and key? And isn't the scarcity of it what actually makes it valuable? So how could it be just handed out freely to anyone who asks? Well, this is because wisdom, again, we have to evaluate this different than any other precious thing that there is in our world. It's completely on its own level, on its own plane. So it comes from God. It is given to us. And finally, the third sort of pillar of understanding wisdom from the Old Testament before we get into this passage is that wisdom is personified as a woman, like I said, calling out in the streets. Turn to Proverbs chapter 8. It should just be one page before chapter 11 here. Wisdom was personified and was before the creation and is really described as the architect that informed creation. Take a look. Chapter 8, verse 1. Does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? There's that personification. Then jump down to verse 26. Before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, and when he established the fountains of the deep. when he assigned to the sea its limit, so the waters might not transgress his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him, like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world and delighting in the children of man. And really the hope and the prayer is that we would delight in wisdom in the same way that wisdom delights in us. And seeing God's creation and wisdom bestowed to us, that's a delight for wisdom personified. And in the same way, wisdom should be our delight. So now that we kind of understand this backdrop of wisdom coming from not only earlier passages in Proverbs, but also in Job, consider this. Wisdom is not some impersonal force. That's not a very good way to summarize wisdom, because it's a living attribute of God. That's why and how it was able to be there at creation before we even came into existence. It's an attribute of God. So wisdom, really, tapping into wisdom, let's put it that way. Tapping into wisdom is not taking something from God, detaching it from him, and then carrying it off, and now I can use wisdom to make my own choices apart from God, to exercise my own will apart from his. That doesn't work. Why not? Well, think of it as tapping into something's power. Think of it as a lamp set up on a desk. It only works when it's plugged in, and then it can shine. But if you're going to say to yourself, well, let me take this light over here apart from the source, and you unplug it and carry it off, it loses its light. If you want the portable light, then you have to take it with you. You can do that, but that's a flashlight. It comes with batteries. Probably not included. So again, if we're talking about plugging into God as the source of all wisdom, we cannot extract that from him and carry it off to go and do our own thing. Wisdom it begins with the fear of the Lord, and it's aligning ourselves with his attributes, with his will, with his commands. And that is a daily process. We don't just ask for wisdom, it's given to us. We never have to worry about being wise again. It's a calling. It's a life of sacrifice. So, to understand this word a little bit more thoroughly, again, we've got the Hebrew word in the Old Testament that used, but in the New Testament, the Greek word is Sophia, which I was having a conversation with my mom about this earlier in the week, and Sophie Grace, that's where your name comes from. Wisdom and grace. It's pretty good qualities to strive for, so keep at it. But for the Greeks, Sophia really was not describing, again, for the Greeks, was not really describing a wise person under the understanding of the Hebrew word, chokmah. It was actually describing something completely different. Plato and Aristotle used the word wisdom, or Sophia, to describe a system of truth that tries to answer metaphysical questions, like, how did we get here? What is my purpose? What is my value? What is right and wrong? Those types of worldview questions. So really, for them, wisdom was really applied to philosophy. That's a secular view of wisdom. That's more like understanding or knowledge. That's not wisdom. For the Romans, they applied Sophia. The Greek and Roman intellectuals were known as sophists. So for them, wisdom was the ability to communicate their point as an argument. And whether they were right or they were wrong, wisdom was winning the argument. So really, they were just great debaters. That doesn't mean that they feared the Lord. It was only for the Jews who applied Sophia, wisdom, with the understanding of Proverbs, wisdom. So for them, Sophia was chokmah. For them, true wisdom was completely linked together with righteousness and the fear of the Lord. And that's different than filling up our minds with head knowledge and becoming smart and witty people. Wisdom is not being smart and witty or having a good, personality or being very convincing or funny. That's not wisdom. Wisdom is the fear of the Lord. It's a completely different concept. So with that in mind, those who align themselves with God's wisdom, those are the wise. And those who stand directly opposed to that are the fools. So we're going to play a little game. I don't know if you ever played that board game, Operation, where you're kind of performing a surgery and you've got to try to pick the things that don't belong out of the patient. And if you accidentally bump into the sides, you get a little warning sound and you lose. We're going to play Operation. And we're going to take a look at two examples, two different patients, let's say, and we're going to evaluate them. We're going to try to take a look at their symptoms. What signs are they presenting to us? We're going to try to narrow those down and try to form a diagnosis, right? Provide them, this is what is wrong with you. This is what you have. This is what you caught. And then after that, then point 3 is you got to give them a prognosis. I mean, what's the life expectancy here? How long do I have, doc? That's what we're going to evaluate. All right, 2 patients. Identify their symptoms, provide a diagnosis, and then deliver them a prognosis. That's what we're going to do. All with wisdom as the backdrop. So, symptoms. What is our patient experiencing? Let's take a look. Verse 12. Chapter 11, verse 12. Whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense. Let's look at the wicked person first. Whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense. Belittling our neighbor, you could apply that specifically to our next door neighbor, which is not smart to do, to belittle that person. Number one, because it's not what God would have us to do. But also, you live right next door to the person. Imagine the turmoil. We're blessed. We've got great neighbors. But imagine the hardship that it would be to sow seeds of discord with your neighbors and to belittle and constantly put them down or slander them and talk about them behind their back and drive a wedge between you and your neighbor. And now your house is facing somebody else who you're not on good terms with. I mean, imagine the conflict that would cause. We could open up the definition of neighbor and really apply that to anyone, friends, family. It is not wise to belittle our neighbor, and it lacks sense. But that is a symptom. That is something that a fool would do. 2, whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets. And I had to really drive this point home with the youth is that it's not like keeping a bad secret that really should be brought to the light. Keeping a sin secret that really should be confessed. That's not what we're talking about here. But if a friend comes to us in full confidence knowing that this information is secure, and I'm bringing it to you for the sake of wise counsel and for biblical prayer, and then we post that on the front pages of our whatever platforms that we have, we are betraying the person's trust. Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets that ought not be revealed. Verse 14, another symptom of the fool. Where there is no guidance, a people falls. It's almost comical to me how mature people think less and less and less of their own opinion compared to the opinions and the advice of people who are older and wiser than they. It's the young ones who think that everything's already been figured out. I have everything that I need. What's the point of asking for advice? I think I've got this. I can handle it. But that control, the older you get, seems to go into other people's hands who are older and wiser than ours. It is good to ask advice, especially the youth over here in the front. It's good to ask for advice. Whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer harm. We spent a good amount of time on this one, if you remember, because at face value, at first glance, that looks like it just doesn't make sense. I mean, who wouldn't want to put up a security or help out their neighbor? Like, why would that be a bad thing? Well, if you remember, when we really picked this apart, if you're going to give and you're going to be charitable to somebody who is in need, then give freely and confidently, but don't expect anything in return. Don't sign on a loan for a guy that you barely know, right? But if you want to help them out, don't snuff out that's probably the Holy Spirit telling you, I need to help this person because it's within my power to do so. Remember earlier in the book, do not withhold good from those when it is in your power to do it. That still applies, but if you're going to do it, give it. It's a gift. We don't expect anything back. Don't put up a security for a stranger, somebody who's not worthy of your trust. Don't stick out your neck and trust somebody who's not worthy of your trust, because you will get burned. And it's not good for them either, to be dependent on somebody when really it's time to take some responsibility. It's not good for either party. A violent man, verse 16, violent man gets riches. I would love some more riches. So that one's a little bit disheartening. I don't know if you feel the same way. But I'll tell you what, no riches are going to be worth achieving that through sinful means. Because you're selling something that is eternally valuable for something that has an expiration date. And nobody with biblical wisdom would sign up for a transaction like that. So if violence is the way, and if bullying people to get to the top and slandering their name for the sake of earning the promotion is what it's going to take, it's not a worthwhile trade for people who are seeking after God's wisdom and know that there's something bigger at play here. A cruel man, verse 17, hurts himself. Verse 18, very similar to the one that we just covered, the wicked earns deceptive wages. Why do the wicked prosper? It's an age-old question. Because they're bullying their way to the top. But they only think that they're at the top. Because in God's economy, they're actually at the bottom. And one day, justice will be served. And I don't care if I'm right in the eyes of man, at least I shouldn't, but I want to seek to be right in the eyes of the Lord. And if that means giving up of myself in order to see that come to be, that is true wisdom. But he who pursues evil will die. More on that in a minute. So those are the symptoms that our wicked patient, that our foolish patient are presenting to us. Now, it's very easy to take a symptom like, oh, I have a sore throat and I have a runny nose. And it's very easy to just say like, okay, so you're sick. You've got the sore throat. Well, that's a symptom. And maybe that's all there is to it, but what's causing that? I mean, we could just, grab a cough drop and just hope for the best, but if you're sick, that's only going to maybe soothe or give some temporary comfort, but it's not going to solve what's wrong. Especially we don't want to misdiagnose somebody either. So we can't just hyper-focus on the symptoms and say, what is wrong with this person? Well, obviously they're a violent person. That's what's wrong with them. They're violent. Well, they're violent, but why are they violent? Well, it's because they're foolish. And why are they foolish? We'll get to that. So the symptoms of a wise person, really the polar opposite of everything that we just walked down. So we'll keep this brief. A man of understanding remains silent. They know when to keep their mouth shut. This is opposed to slander, somebody who doesn't know when to stop and who freely speaks, whether it's a helpful word or a hurtful word, it doesn't matter. They're just going to speak. It's a loose cannon. A wise person knows when to stay silent, when to bite the tongue. Verse 13, he who is trustworthy in spirit keeps the thing covered. Again, this is not talking about keeping somebody's secret that really needs to be confessed to God and encouraging them, like, you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to tell anybody. You don't need to make it right. You don't need to confess. Just keep it, but nobody knows except for you anyway. What's the harm? That's not what this is talking about. Verse 14, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. Another symptom of a wise person is that they don't just have one advisor or two advisors, but they surround themselves with an abundance of wise people because that wisdom will rub off. So guys, surround yourself with wise people. Not one, not two, but a community of wise people. I can think of maybe one place where you might be able to find that, hopefully. But you're here already. So good job. He who hates striking hands in pledge is secure. Again, this is not about, we could go way off on a rabbit trail and misinterpret this. He who hates striking hands in pledge, it doesn't mean that you should never honor your word, or you should never keep a promise. But Jesus tells us, let your yes be yes and your no be no. So you want to be a trustworthy person. You don't want to strike hands and pledge in making these types of deals with co-signing a loan for a person that is not really worthy of that trust. A wise person is going to be more reserved and cautious in making those types of decisions. A gracious woman gets honor. Somebody who is not gracious and is not quick to forgive probably wants to take that vengeance into their own hands. Well, you said something rude to me, so I'm going to say something that's going to cut you deeply. And those sharp, witty comments, a wise woman is going to be gracious and take a step back, take the high road, and that person gets honor. But the one who sows righteousness gets a sure reward. Again, you could sow wickedness and cheat your way to the top, let's say, and earn deceptive wages. But really, in God's economy, the one who is righteous gets a sure reward. The wicked get a temporary reward, and that is not secure. James chapter 5 has a lot to say about that. And then finally, verse 19, whoever is steadfast in righteousness will live. See, the person who pursues evil will die. The person who runs towards wickedness is going to watch that destroy their life, but the person who pursues righteousness will live, because pursuing righteousness is the fear of the Lord, and it's the fear of the Lord that gives us life. So in summary, each of these symptoms, good and bad, flow from a person's heart, and that shows us how sick we really are. Turn, if you would, to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7, starting at verse 15. Again, these examples, these symptoms, do not really explain what is right or what is wrong with a person, but they provide evidence. They're merely indicators of what's really going on under the surface. So let's find out what's really going on under the surface so we can give them the right diagnosis. If somebody has COVID and the symptoms that they are presenting, just speaking from when I had it, was like my back was sore, and for one miserable morning, I couldn't taste my coffee, and that really was the worst of all of it. And I had a sore throat, runny nose, right? So let's say somebody says, hey, doc, I have a runny nose. Well, they don't know they have COVID, but let's say the doc's like, oh, yeah, runny nose, I've seen it 100 times. No problem. You've got a head cold, right? You'll be fine. But they actually have COVID. Well, you just misdiagnosed the person. You got to know what's going on here. So again, these are just indicators. We need to know what's really causing this. So that's what this is for. Matthew chapter 7, starting at verse 15. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing. So in other words, they give the appearance of something else. So right off the bat, that should prove to us the importance of actually taking the time and getting this right, because we know that the patient is going to actually present as something else. They're going to present and they're going to show other symptoms than what's really going on. It's all part of the deception. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, you will recognize them by their fruits. So, if the actions are an indicator, what is it indicating? What is it pointing us back to? Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Really, really great verse. And very eye-opening to understand what is wrong with the human condition here. It's Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. The human heart is referred to as a wellspring of life, because everything that we say and do, it's all welling up from our heart, and then it pours out through our hands and our feet and our mouth and our ears and our eyes and our everything. And if you know that spring is contaminated, even just a little bit, you can't trust the integrity of the water that comes out of the hand or the feet or the mouth. It's all poisonous. It's all wicked. It is all foolish. We have a sin condition. We have a broken heart. Jesus can fix that. We can't do it ourselves. So really, what is wrong with the world is not the violence that we see. That is a problem, but that's not the cause of what's wrong with the world. The cause of what's wrong with the world is not the fact that we see people freely slandering each other and speaking in demeaning ways. It's not that we see a failure to love people, and that's what's wrong with the world. What's wrong with the world is a wicked, sinful heart, and there is an abundance. There's no end to the number of ways that could play itself out in a society. If you actually take a look at Proverbs chapter 10, this is what we studied, I think it was 2 weeks ago. You can actually see how a wicked heart can affect not just a life or a family, but it can actually impact an entire city. Take a look at Proverbs, it is 11, I'm sorry. Proverbs 11, verse 10. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, there are shouts of gladness. By the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, but by the mouth of the wicked, it is overthrown. Actions flow from the heart. So the diagnosis, what is wrong with the patient? Well, the answer to that question is found in verse 20. And really, all of these symptoms are building up to what's really wrong with a person. So Proverbs 11, verse 20. Those of crooked heart are an abomination to the Lord, but those of blameless ways are his delight. So what is wrong with a patient? And what is wrong with the world? It's sin in the heart. It's a broken heart. And a person who has a heart that has been regenerated by Jesus Christ now has the capacity to long after and to desire and to follow God's righteousness, which is something that a person with a wicked and sinful heart is not going to do. A crooked heart is an abomination to the Lord, but those of blameless ways are his delight. So what's the prognosis? What should a patient expect moving forward? What's the life expectancy? Well, for one group, it's not looking good. For one patient, verse 21, be assured, an evil person will not go unpunished, but the offspring of the righteous will be delivered. Which is interesting to say because the good judge, the perfect judge that God is going to pay the wicked according to what they have done. This is not unfair. This is justice. This is pure and perfect justice. Where God, even though we see, why do the wicked prosper today? It's so difficult to watch people seemingly living in prosperity and happiness with wicked hearts. And it almost looks like maybe they slipped under God's watchful eye. But that's not the case because they're allowed to do this for a time, but judgment is coming. And their unrighteous deeds will not go unpunished. But for the person who has been regenerated, for the person who has been touched and saved by the blood of Jesus Christ, that person who is steadfast in righteousness will live. That person's offspring will be delivered. So I'd just like to close with a quote. And we actually can have the praise team come on up if you guys would get situated here. In conclusion, these proverbs do not merely ask us to make changes in our habits of speaking and giving. They call us to look through our lives through the eyes of our neighbors, seeing the value of our lives and what they bring to others. That spirit of deference and of sacrifice and of service that was modeled by our Lord Jesus Christ. Again, this is a heart issue. And it's something that the last few weeks, especially going through the Gospel of Mark, this has come up. This is a theme that is not new. It has come up over and over and over again. This is a heart issue. Would you bow your heads and pray with me? Father, I just thank you so much for just allowing us the opportunity to worship you today and to study and to really apply ourselves. I just pray that you would just give us a spirit of wisdom, that you would add to our understanding, that we would follow you in righteousness, and that we would have a healthy fear and respect for the Lord, that would be what we build our lives upon. Again, I just thank you for bringing everyone here safely today. I thank you for these youth and their willingness to participate today. I just pray that everything that was said and done here today was honoring and glorifying to you. And I pray that it wouldn't end here, today either. I pray that this would be something we would carry with us into our weeks. Whatever you have in store for us, I pray that we would really meet those things head on with the spirit of wisdom. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.